And now, by request from Bay Ridge, Larry Underwood and Baby, Can You Dig Your Man? Well, baby, can you?
I know you got the hurt drop right there in your eyes, but here I am, baby, on my knees to apologize. There's nothing I won't do for the two of us to make a stand. Baby, can you dig your man?
He's a righteous man.
Tell me, baby, can you dig your man?
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of cinema, your archbishop of banterbury, your chancellor of cheerfulness, your pharaoh of physical media, and a new one, your evangelist of the imagination. That's right, Robert Meyer Burnett, your existential Mr. Rogers here, and I am robcasting at you. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity, this is Robservations, the show about something. Robservations episode number 581. It's Christmas week. And you know, I think about Christmas. I think about all the things when I was a kid. I look forward to the holidays. I mean, they had to celebrate Christmas in my family till I was about 5 because we were Jewish and my parents weren't ready to tell me that they weren't going to be a destroyer of joy and destroy my love of the more imaginative aspects of Christmas. But then I realized, oh, I can be a Jew and I get presents for 8 nights. I'll be Jewish now. So we celebrated Hanukkah from the time I was about 5 years old on. But you know what? It instilled in me a lifelong love, and a lifelong love of Christmas. Who doesn't love Christmas? Now, I live in a house I guess you'd call secular, but the other ladies I live with, they're not Jewish. I know, I found myself a shiksa goddess. What can I say? But what we do is we celebrate Christmas here, and I love it. The girls, Elizabeth, she spends a long time on the tree. I do get my Hallmark Star Trek Christmas ornaments in. I have a stocking. It's fun. I enjoy it. So I love Christmas week. I hope you all are all loving the Christmas lead up to Christmas, getting those last minute Christmas presents, wrapping things. I like wrapping things. It's fun. The whole ritual of it, you know, I think you can celebrate. I don't understand why people get all like, let's get religious about it all. I read a really interesting tweet thread from a Muslim. I don't know who did it, who was celebrating their first Christmas this year, their first official Christmas, and it was quite illuminating, and I found it amusing. I wish I had remembered what it was, but it was on Twitter, and I loved it. I don't know if I retweeted it, but it was. I thought it was a great thread. And look, you know, whether you want to buy into the religious aspects of Christmas or not, I think the overall message, and one that any imagination connoisseur around the world can embrace, is there is a certain, of course, imaginative aspect of Christmas, whether it's Father Christmas, Santa Claus, Kris Kringle, however you want to just the idea of all of that is it's pure fantasy, it's pure imagination, connoisseurship, and you know, as a kid, I loved the Rankin and Bass Christmas specials. Put one foot in front of the other, and soon you'll be walking out the door. I love that. I loved I'm Mr. Heat Miser, I'm Mr. Sun, I'm Mr. Green Christmas, I'm Mr. 101. Who did not? Who didn't love a Charlie Brown Christmas? Come on. Love Christmas. Anyway, I'll spare you my vocal stylings. So I just wanted to start out by saying Merry Christmas to everybody. Happy Hanukkah, which is over. Happy Kwanzaa, whatever you celebrate. But I just love the idea that Christmas is not just Christmas to me. It's also maybe Christmas and Halloween. They're at the forefront of being an imagination connoisseur. And I like that. I like that. So even though religiously I might not be somebody where Christmas resonates with me on a spiritual level. It resonates with me on an imaginative level, and I think that's okay too. Saying that said, boy, I think as if you've watched this show and you know me, you've come to know me over the years, over these 581 episodes, you kind of know where I'm coming from, you know what I like, you know my predilections and all of these things, and you know I like Stephen King, but one of my favorite things in the world is Stephen King's The Stand. Read that book many times, and as you know, we've had the first episode of The Stand drop. It embraced the television cliche of nonlinear storytelling, which, to be honest, I find that is now being used as a narrative crutch, because what it does is it sets up a question for you, then goes back in time to answer that question, and then moves forward in time. I feel that you really have to have the subject matter in hand, well in hand, to utilize that method of storytelling effectively. So I found out before I saw The Stand that they were going to embrace that narrative storytelling trope, and I wasn't down with that. It didn't hit me well. And then the first episode aired, and it really didn't hit me well. But beyond that, what I found quite shocking, to be honest, is that the first hour of The Stand spent quite some time with one of the most loathsome characters in the story, Harold Lauder. And I found that both the narrative structure of the show and beginning with Harold Lauder was completely counterintuitive to what I thought The Stand should be. Now, I've been finding myself coming to grips with the changes made in a lot of the things that I've loved growing up. Star Wars, Star Trek, now The Stand. And it seems to me what's very interesting when I see a lot of modern creators, when they come aboard reimagining or dealing with these new franchises, I think that, and the more I read about the philosophy behind the choices that are made, there is a strange arrogance amongst many showrunners, and I can understand why. They have long explanations about why they should change things and move things around and make them different. Now, I understand when you're a showrunner and you are going to adapt something. That's got to be tough. A daunting task. You're adapting something that's beloved or means something to you. But there is always the impulse to make it more, well, yours. How do you, as a creator or writer yourself, take someone else's work and change it to suit your needs? We've been seeing it since the dawn of adaptation of any kind, whether it's adapting a literary work for the stage or a screenplay for a movie that's adapting a literary work, or the same thing is true of television. There's always liberties that need to be taken. There's things that need to be changed when you change something from one medium into another. You have to make changes. You have to make things work, otherwise they don't work. You know, there's people that have talked about, unfilmable books. David Cronenberg has done it twice. He made Naked Lunch and he made Crash. There's a lot of liberty taken with Naked Lunch, but how do you turn that book into a narrative? It's hard to do. There's a lot of instances of that in cinema history and in television history, and things have worked out well. Famously, as far as Stephen King is concerned, Stanley Kubrick made The Shining definitely his own. He took that story, and Stephen King himself did not like what Stanley Kubrick did with The Shining. It was then readapted by Mick Garris, who had adapted The Stand previously, that Stephen King wrote the screenplay for, the 4 screenplays actually. So I get it. Narrative is tough. But what I find really interesting that is in the modern day, the modern age, I guess. Even when Kubrick, when he adapted The Shining, he looked upon that book and the story that was being told by Stephen King as more of a metaphor. So he fundamentally changed the story, but because it was uniquely Kubrickian, I didn't object to it. I love The Shining as a book, but there was something unique about what Kubrick was doing. Now that brings me to this new adaptation of The Stand. Now, I don't know if I would have felt this way had I not seen Mick Garris's 1994 adaptation of The Stand that was actually written by King himself, which, whether you have a problem with some of the acting, and definitely was done for not a lot of money, there was a fealty there to King's original story. Well, now we're watching this new version of The Stand, and I can't help but feel the same way I felt with Doctor Who lately, Star Trek, even watching things like, The Last Jedi, that there is a fundamental need by modern creators to put their spin on something, which at first glance I don't have a problem with, but then there's something going on where there's a thought that, maybe we can improve on these narratives. Make them better and more contemporary. And my whole thought behind that is that narratives are best when they're universal, I think, when they can transcend time. Putting in vernacular that is contemporary, or making things colloquial, what it does is it immediately dates something. We've talked about in Star Trek Discovery when Adira says things like, "You're kind of the bomb." Teenagers today barely use that phrase. And if when they do, or when I say, "You're the bomb, yo," I'm saying it in an ironic, kind of wacky, fun fashion. I don't really mean it to be something that how would I talk like that? And yet, in the 32nd century, which is, let's face it, 1100 years from now, to think that a teenager is going to be using that turn of phrase immediately dates what you're writing. And my question is, why would you choose to use that kind of vernacular? It would be more interesting, I would have thought, in a science fiction show to make up your own. Felgercarb or frack, like in Battlestar Galactica. So I've had questions since I've watched The Stand. I've watched the episode twice now. And there's so much of that story that I feel was lost. And I was curious, how did that happen? What were they thinking? And I got to find out a little bit about what they were thinking, because the AV Club, the Onion's AV Club, I guess it's not the Onion anymore, is it? But had an interview with The Stand showrunner, Benjamin, I don't know if it's Cavill or Cavell, centering, here's the article title. It's written by Randall Colburn. It was dropped today. The Stand showrunner, Benjamin Cavill, on centering the real protagonist of Stephen King's story. Now, I've read, as you know, The Stand multiple times, and I would not think that Harold Lauder, one of the most loathsome characters in the novel, would it be anyone's choice to say is the central protagonist of the story. But apparently our showrunner believes that to be the case. Let's delve into this and find out why he feels this way. Shall we? Oh, wait a minute. It just so happens I have this letter on cue to read to you. Christmas comes early for Stephen King fans this year. Well, if you want to look at it that way. As last week marked the premiere of CBS All Access's The Stand, a new 9-part adaptation of King's post-apocalyptic riff on Lord of the Rings. There's an unexpected timeliness to the story's post-pandemic landscape in which plague survivors are supernaturally drawn to opposing camps. But don't go in expecting another Contagion. Why would I? As with King's novel, the CBS Limited series is primarily about what happens after 99.4% of the world's population is gone. Is it? I would say that a third of that book is what happens during the pandemic. And during and before. The fall of civilization is a huge part of that, at least in my mind, having read it numerous times, a huge part of that book. That much is made clear in the premiere, which, in a departure from King's novel, begins in the wake of what society names Captain Trips. For showrunner Benjamin Cavell, it was obvious from the get-go that a timey-wimey approach was the best means of seeing the story through fresh eyes. Does the story need to be seen through fresh eyes? I mean, it's a novel. It's endured for almost or over 40 years now. Does it need to be seen through fresh eyes, or do you go back to the novel and trust to the story that you're telling? I don't know. That's a question to be asked. It's just one of the many bold choices. And as we noted in our pre-air review, it's just one of the many bold choices that he made alongside co-creator and director Josh Boone. Quote, "The book means what it means to people, and they're going to make what they make of our adaptation," he tells the AV Club. But the one thing they really can't say is that we haven't thought through every decision we made. Everything we did was done deliberately and thoughtfully. Good to know. I'm all about authorship. That's what I want to see. And according to Mr. Cavill, that's what they did. Cavill took some time ahead of the premiere to discuss some of those choices, including the time jumps and his decision to center the premiere around Owen Teague's Harold Lauder. In our chat, he also discussed his early love for King's work, and discussed King's work and what exactly he thinks sets apart the show's opposing protagonists, opposing prophets, Randall Flagg and Mother Abigail. The AV Club starts and says, "Were you a Stephen King fan growing up?" Benjamin Cavell says, "I guess I started reading Stephen King at the same time everyone, at least everyone I knew, did when you were just becoming teenagers. I was already at that point starting to understand that my real passion was for writing in some capacity. I didn't know whether being a writer meant writing books or writing movies or writing for magazines or something, but I just knew that I loved writing. I've never been a big horror guy, so books like It and The Shining and Pet Sematary, those real touchstone King books, they never made me think, oh, I would love to write something like that. I just never felt immersed in it. Whereas The Stand, I really don't think of as a horror book. King himself said that it's his attempt to write Lord of the Rings. It's a big adventure fantasy, and I gravitated to that. That and books like The Running Man, post-apocalyptic predictive science fiction stuff, that's what I gravitated to. How did you find the story again as an adult?" Benjamin Cavill says, "CBS All Access programming head Julie McNamara approached me, I guess 3 years ago. Would you want to do this thing? Josh Boone had been trying to do it for a long time as a feature. I don't really understand how that could work. I don't know how you could do this 1,200-page book as a feature. Getting it to 9 hours is already a trick. Well, maybe if you didn't spend half the first episode dealing with Harold Lauder, just a thought. Getting it to 9 hours is already a trick, but I think Julie felt rightly that the only way to do it righteously was to take advantage of what I think is a really new medium. This kind of long-form, super high-end limited series where you get essentially feature-level actors, a feature budget, feature effects. You're essentially making a 9-hour feature, and I feel like that's the only way to do this justice. When she approached me with that pitch, how do you say no?" The Audio Video Club says, "What's so striking about the series is that it starts not with the plague's release or one of the book's heroes, but with Harold Lauder. Leading with Harold and Franny is probably one of the boldest decisions in a series filled with them. How did that come about, and why is Harold such a focus for you?" And then he says, "I think that there's two parts to that answer, because we don't just start with Harold, we also start with Harold after the plague, which is a very conscious decision. It seemed to me, when I revisited the book, that the non-linear approach was the clear way to do it. For one thing, we didn't want to make people sit through 3 episodes of the world dying before we got to the peak of our story." Now, that's where I first, in this interview, stopped and I said, why not? Why wouldn't you? I mean, if you go back and you look at the first miniseries that King himself wrote, the first episode is about the fall of man. And I think that in the case of The Shining, the fall of civilization, not only is it important to the story, but it's also wildly entertaining to watch civilization fall. And what's really interesting is, as you're jumping between all of these protagonists, whether it's Franny, whether it's Larry Underwood, whether it's Stu Redman, all of that's very entertaining from a narrative standpoint, and they're filling in different aspects. Like, you ask yourself, okay, we start in Texas, rural Texas, and then we jump into New York City, and you can juxtapose how both of these areas are still feeling the effects of the fall of civilization. And there's a narrative thrust as you're watching these characters get caught up in the cataclysm and wondering how are they going to escape. But anyway, we didn't want to make people sit through 3 episodes of the world dying before we got to the peak of our story. But now I'm curious, after 1 episode, are we going to go back and then we're going to see Larry Underwood and we're going to go back and revisit the fall of civilization again? I don't know. We'll have to see. Captain Trips is the mechanism by which the world gets emptied out so that the heroes can walk to Mordor. What comes after, the rebuilding and the battle for the soul of what's left, that's really the narrative spine of the book. How would you rebuild civilization if given the chance? Besides, he says, Contagion and Steven Soderbergh already brilliantly told the story of that kind of slow-rolling worldwide pandemic. It just didn't seem like it would ever be our focus. We wanted to stay in the limited point of view of our characters and experience the apocalypse through their eyes. When I read this, I thought that was so odd, because we do. If you read the book, you do see the apocalypse through their eyes. And this idea that, well, because Steven Soderbergh did Contagion, well, we don't have to do it in our story. As if, well, one, everyone's seen Contagion, and somehow that's a touchstone showing how a global pandemic propagates across the planet. And I read that and I thought to myself, well, but The Stand is what it is. I mean, anybody who's read the book, the whole first third of the book is why you read it in the first place. It's some of the most propulsive, some of the most engrossing, some of the greatest storytelling Stephen King as a storyteller ever did. So the idea that you don't want to do that, and because, I saw it in this other movie, I find that an odd choice. And it's like, are you adapting this material or not? And here's where I found it interesting that our showrunner, who's in charge of making The Stand, is now comparing and contrasting and deciding that, well, I already saw Contagion. So Contagion must be the last word on how viruses are spread. Now, I've told you on the show, I love any story about diseases, and Contagion is great. It may be my favorite cinematic tale of how a virus, but it can spread across the planet, but it's very realistic. It's almost documentary in style. I don't think the Contagion robs me of my love of Outbreak, which, Wolfgang Peterson did a pretty good job there. So, one of the joys of The Stand, one of my favorite things about it, is the fall of civilization, is the disease outbreak and watching how one small little, somebody escapes from a facility and, the whole world pays the price. I like that. It just didn't seem like it would ever be our focus. We wanted to stay in the limited point of view of our characters and experience the apocalypse through their eyes, which is odd to me because you do experience it with their eyes. And now he goes on. And why do we start with Harold, he says? I think in a lot of ways, Harold is the protagonist of the novel. I suppose King tipped you off to that a little bit because he's a writer, and King certainly loves to lead stories with writers. But he doesn't lead his story of The Stand with Harold Lauder. But in some ways, Harold is the person with the most complete arc in the book. He's also in the Boulder sections, and what's difficult about Boulder is that a lot of our characters are relatively safe there. Harold, though, is essentially behind enemy lines. He's the one with the secret. But we also felt that in order for this series to be successful, somebody like Harold, and also, frankly, someone like Lloyd, another villain, who we don't see until episode 2, has to be people whose sympathies we felt. People who we can really identify with and root for, sometimes in spite of ourselves. I read that and I'm like, I find that odd. And when you're dealing with The Stand, suddenly you want us, Lloyd Henreid and Harold Lauder are people that we're supposed to sympathize with and in spite of ourselves. Now, this is from a fundamental storytelling standpoint, a change. It's a fundamental change in the actual story that is being adapted. Now, So we have our showrunner who it believes that Lloyd and Harold are the protagonists or the people that we're supposed to like because they're villains, but we can sympathize with them. We're going to lead with the villains. We're going to lead with the bad guys. We're going to lead with the people we don't want to be. And let's face it, one of the great things about The Stand, one of the things that brings you into the book is because characters like Nick Andros and Stu Redman and Larry Underwood are people that you like. You sympathize with them, you like them, and you like them as people, and you want them to live. Whereas Harold Lauder is an irredeemable prick. Now I can understand focusing on him, and Lloyd Henreid. These are bad people. They were bad people when we meet them, and they remain bad people throughout the rest of the story. I don't have any sympathy for Harold Lauder. And I don't. Now, maybe as a postmodern way of telling a story, you can do that, but is that what Stephen King is doing in his story? Even Kubrick, the Jack Torrance in King's novel, you're still following him as Jack Nicholson in the movie. And in both cases, they're tragic figures. The Overlook gets the better of them, and it's sad to watch. But the AV Club says, by focusing on Harold, you're also shining a light on the themes of free will and choice. He's the character who has one of the biggest choices to make. Does he embrace this new community or fall victim to old resentments? For him, the end of the world is an opportunity. That's correct, but he doesn't have a choice to make. Harold was never going to do the right thing. He was never going to be redeemed. This is not the story of an anti-hero becoming a hero. This is the story of ordinary people finding the hero within themselves and triumphing. And the story of The Stand is the story of all of us. All of us could find it within ourselves to make our stand. Harold is a compromised character from the beginning. Harold and Lloyd were never going to make their stands. And I think that by changing the focus to those two characters, or Harold making him the central protagonist, is a fundamental misreading of the text. And I think that's problematic. Now I understand in our world today, maybe it's sexier to focus the story that way. But then are you serving the book that's being adapted, that has been beloved? One of the reasons I love it, I've loved it for over 40 years since I first read it. Is that serving what King's intent was? And I think whenever you ask, if you want to change something or you want to make an adaptation up to date, I think the fundamental, the underlying foundational idea of adapting a story is to at least retain the spirit of that story. Retain what was originally there, that the author's intent was all about, what made you love it in the first place. Cavill goes on to say, we were very conscious about the idea that Harold has the opportunity to become a different person. This person even has a name, They call him Hawk, and it becomes this sort of alternate future for Harold. And Owen's performance, frankly, I think is a revelation. But there's a particular moment in the pilot where he saves Eon Bailey's Wyzak from falling into one of the graves. You see Owen's eyes as Wyzak gives him this hug and all this praise for being on the ball, and they somehow manage to be both enormously proud and terrified of his acceptance. And I just thought that it was so deep and interesting, his pride and his fear of being accepted and praised by these rough and tumble older guys. All very valid. But we know that Harold, what I think what's happening here is the showrunners, in this case, Mr. Cavill, clearly identifies with Harold for other reasons and wants to put Harold first and foremost at the forefront of the story. And to me, I find that strange because what's really interesting is that the character of Stu Redman, who is a salt of the earth kind of a guy, watching him deal with the forces of the world that he was never a part of, that sort of encroach in on him, and watching him as a good man navigate things that maybe aren't so good, that to me is a much more interesting thing. Now, And that's because, look, we're telling you, if The Stand was only about Harold Lauder's journey, I would say yes. But you have a whole pantheon of characters that you're dealing with here. And then, speaking of choice, were there conversations being had about what exactly distinguishes Boulder and Las Vegas? So which Abigail Fremantle and Randolph Flagg, they're two groups of people. It's not as simple as good and evil. What would you say draws people to one another? And Cavill says, my mantra in the writing room was that it's not just interesting for Vegas to be a place of evil, capital E, evil. It was very important to us that both of the societies be functioning in a way that felt grounded. I love this idea. We did a lot of research about kind of how you would keep certain things going and what would make sense. It was also important that Vegas, at least initially, be ahead of Boulder in terms of getting services like electricity and stuff to work, which is also true of the book. We also wanted to show how Flagg could seem like a viable alternative, that as viewers you could say, I can't be certain that the pitch wouldn't have some pull for me. There's a guy who, for one thing, looks like Alexander Skarsgård. He's charming, he has supernatural powers, and he claims to have a real understanding, a real handle on what's going on. He knows what all of this horror that we've lived through is for, and where it's all headed and how we're going to rebuild. I've always thought a big difference between Flagg and Mother Abigail is that they essentially have about the same level of information about what's going on. They are getting, some incomplete sense from some entity. Frankly, I have a theory that they're both talking to the same entity, but that's for a different conversation. They're getting essentially the same level of information at the same level of clarity, but the definitive difference is that Mother Abigail tries to be pretty upfront about what she doesn't know and isn't being told, and Flagg takes great pains to deny that there's anything he doesn't know. See, what's really interesting about that philosophy, or what he just described there, is that I think he's trying to say that, okay, there's an entity, let's call it whatever you want, and that Mother Abigail and Randolph Flagg are basically two people interpreting this information in different ways. No, I think Randolph Flagg is evil. He's evil, and he took advantage of this situation. Indeed, he precipitated this situation specifically to do whatever he's here to do. And Abigail Fremantle, she was given the burden of saving civilization after this whole thing was unleashed because of the life she led, because of the kind of person she was. And I think it's really important to say that The Stand, it's not a certain point of view. It's not your perspective. Randolph Flagg is evil. Abigail Fremantle is not, for whatever reason. And I think that that's a fundamental shift, again, in what the book is about. And as I read this, I'm going to go back and read more about what he talks about. He talks about, we felt like we had the space to do anything, and we managed to restore, say, Rita Blackmore, who is absent from the original miniseries. In that series, Larry escapes New York with Nadine, and we felt like, honestly, that's a real loss. The sojourn he has with Rita in New York is pretty memorable, certainly for me, from the first time I read the book. We were so excited to be able to restore that. We also went in thinking we were going to restore the character of the kid, because he wasn't part of the original series either, right? Because he wasn't in the original novel. We have a draft of the script with scenes for the kid and Trash Can Man, but it just became clear to us at a certain point. I mean, the kid kind of exists in the book to brutalize Trash and transport him to Las Vegas. And when we saw Ezra Miller's characterization of Trash for the first time, I was like, I don't think this guy needs to be more brutalized anymore. Ezra went for it. So that's what he had to say about the Stand miniseries. And I just find it interesting that, to me, The Stand, you do have two versions of the story. You have the original version that was released that we all read, and then 12 years later, he went back and did his unexpurgated version that we also could read. But in my mind, and it will always be the definitive version of me, for me, is the original version of The Stand. But what I found about these comments that I found really interesting is all of this talk is all about how, well, let's change things and do things differently, both from the book itself and the original miniseries and what was adapted. And, maybe it's because my own failing is that I'm so attached to the original version of the book. And then what Stephen King restored with characters like the kid, again, it was like Apocalypse Now Redux. It was really interesting to watch that. But to me, the definitive version of the movie will always be the theatrical version because that's the one that I saw. I love Redux. I own 2 different sets of the films, including the final cut set. And the problem that I have with Redux is, in Apocalypse Now, one of the things you learn is never get off the boat. Sure shit, goddamn right. But in Redux, that's all they do is get off the boat. They get off the boat all the time. They hang out off the boat. And I think when they were making the film in the first place, many times, not all the time, but many times, it's those inclinations. They spent 2.5 years editing Apocalypse Now. And I think the theatrical version is a brilliant version of the movie. And I think that The Stand, the original version of the book, and having read the longer version, I do prefer the original version of the book because I do think that having a character like the kid brutalizing Trash Can Man takes something away from Trash Can Man himself. My life for you. And I don't necessarily think that's the most effective thing. And I think when Stephen King was working with an editor and having somebody question what he was doing and help him craft his story. Look, there's nothing wrong when you're working with someone. It's like when you're editing a movie. I always think having somebody you trust when you're cutting a film, like on Tango Shalom, which I have more festival news about that, but that'll come later. Not today, but later. When you're editing a movie, it's great to have a sounding board and to work with somebody. I love working with a director, and especially when a director appreciates my opinions and we can really craft something together, it becomes a lot more satisfying where we spend time questioning and asking, and is this the right way? And I just found it interesting that once more, I'm always blown away by how much insight I'm getting into the people that are making the things that we love. And I'm perplexed by how so many of these long-time things that people love so much, how when these new showrunners or recent showrunners get a hold of them, their first inclination is to change the material. That somehow the original material itself was not enough to sustain something for modern audiences. I've watched it. It's happened to Star Trek. It's happened to Doctor Who. It's happened to Star Wars. It's happening to all these things when modern creators are trying to impose today's world onto whatever it is that they're adapting, especially if it's something that's, half a century old, like Star Trek. Star Trek is. I mean, let's face it. In order to, the showrunners of modern Star Trek have constantly gone back to the original series and even The Cage. And it's almost as if, until Picard, they haven't even looked at the evolution of Star Trek throughout the ages and seen just how much or how little Star Trek needed to evolve. But nowadays, everything is so much about what's happening of today. And I feel that the creators they're hampering themselves by trying to impose modern storytelling techniques, and they're abandoning the idea that these classical tales, I mean, look, whether you love Lord of the Rings or not, whether you want to get mad at Tom Bombadil or something that Legolas said is actually coming out of Gimli's mouth or whatever, the spirit of Tolkien's tale is there. But then when you're adapting something, people are like, well, Rob, what about the Scouring of the Shire is not there? Look, if people had been invested in 3 movies and they came back when Sam and Merry and Pippin and Frodo came back to the Shire and it was being run by Saruman and Grima Wormtongue, that's not satisfying from a narrative standpoint as far as movies are concerned. It would have been something people would have screamed bloody murder about. So that's a change I can understand. But it doesn't change the fundamental story of what's going on in Lord of the Rings. Losing characters, you got to lose characters and combine them. That's par for the course. But to decide that the main protagonist of a story is different than the author originally intended, I think that's problematic. And I think that's a way of thinking, let's be cool and let's be creative. Let's make The Stand ours. And I get that. Kubrick certainly did that with The Shining. But Stanley Kubrick's a genius. And I think that they spent a hell of a lot of screen time in that first episode. Was that the most valuable use? I feel like somebody maybe identified with Harold and his plight. But I didn't. I didn't fall in love with The Stand because it opens with Harold Lauder being victimized or being brutalized because he's a douche. And I felt when I was watching The Stand, the opening of The Stand, I felt like I was robbed of my enjoyment of that original story. That it was taken away from me, and I was told that you need to focus on this. That thing that you've liked for so long, it's not right. Let's focus on this instead. And I found that interesting. And to be honest, somewhat annoying, because what I'm being told is that the reason I love this story in the first place, we're not going to give that to you, because well, why should we? Why should we give that to you? And I'm like, well, because that's the story that was written. That was the original story. Like, you look at the best King adaptations, and I think the best King adaptations are the ones that are able to retain the spirit of what he's written. You go back and you look at De Palma's adaptation of Carrie. Is it an exact adaptation of Carrie? No. But it's a pretty good representation of the book. Misery, another great King adaptation. Are there things compressed in it? Sure. But it's a pretty good representation of King's story. Stand By Me, great representation of King's story. The Shawshank Redemption, a great representation of King's stories. The best Stephen King adaptations, I think, are the ones that figure out a way to he as close to the original material as possible. Even Bryan Singer's Apt Pupil is pretty close to the original story. And what I don't like and what I find so strange is it's the people that want to come in and change King's work and in this case decide that Harold Lauder is a main protagonist. That's when things go awry. And I think that's true of any adaptation. And I do find that frustrating as a fan. To bring it back to Star Trek, so here's the cover of one of the latest Star Trek magazines. We are Star Trek, diversity, representation, and fandom of the future. You know how I've talked about how modern Star Trek is actually segregating their characters? They're providing more representation, but they're going out of their way to segregate certain kinds of characters with only one another. This cover is a perfect example of that. It's not about fandom. The fandom of the future is tribal, according to Star Trek. And I think it's really insidious. And I don't understand it. Then this is the alternate cover. The alternate cover is, again, we are the future. Well, okay. But once again, you're segregating all of these characters together as opposed to, say, showing the ensemble. It's very weird. And I think that what we're seeing now is it's sort of an insidious way of looking at the future. What Star Trek always said to me is that we're not segregated, that we all work together. Nobody cares about your sexuality when you're living in a universe where you have interspecies couplings and romances. We've talked about that before. But because everyone is so eager to address issues of today that are fashionable now, let me show you how aware I am of what's going on now. They're imposing our modern problems or our modern struggles on. The great thing about Star Trek originally, and now people would say, Rob, back in the 60s, they didn't quite do this. They did as much. Star Trek has always done as much as they could at the time they were doing it. They've always pushed it a little further. Now I feel we've gone backwards in the desire to give people representation. The representation that's being given is to segregate those people and not include them in the body politic or whatever. They're off on their own, literally in their own rooms, and a cover like this, that's exactly what that is. And that's strange to me. And I don't necessarily know what to make of this. And I think, again, the thing with The Stand is there's a fundamental change in the direction of the story, according to Mr. Cavill, the showrunner of The Stand, and where Harold Lauder is coming from. He's the one person that's been given a choice and all that. Yes, he chooses to do evil because he's a douche canoe. He's a douchebag. He was probably born that way. He wasn't made that way necessarily because he was bullied. He was bullied because he was a douche, and at least the way they've shown it. And he's also creepy. You know, remember, Harold Lauder isn't just bullied. He's also sneaking glances and spying on Franny. I mean, he's a creeper. And he's shown as being somebody who is pretty far gone, which makes him easily susceptible to Randall Flagg's influence. He doesn't have a choice. He's made a choice. Every time he went and was trying to spy on Franny or literally look through a peephole, as he's irredeemable. And he's an adjunct of the evil that Randall Flagg represents, the evil that unfortunately permeates many human beings. And I just find it interesting that the showrunners of The Stand want to make him the protagonist at the expense of characters who, I think the great thing about King's story is The Stand says that all of us, young or old, all of us, if you are pure of heart, all of us can find the strength and the wherewithal to make our stand. And that's what I thought The Stand was about. Not about the redemption of an irredeemable douchebag who, I don't know, perhaps I'm wrong. Perhaps I'm old-fashioned. What do you guys think? I don't know. Anyway, that's what I was thinking today. Now, speaking of that, let me just jump in very quickly because I wanted to talk about this. Willow Yang brought this up, and I wanted to first start talking about this story. Willow Yang asked me, I posted an article. Ezekiel Emanuel wrote this article, and I'm going to share it with you. But Willow says, the article about Ezekiel Emanuel just reminded me of the Next Generation's episode Half a Life, where the people undergo euthanasia once they've reached an age where they're considered a burden to society. What did you think of that episode? I liked Half a Life. It's got a romance element to it. I thought it was a really interesting episode of Star Trek and science fiction because it was compelling. So Ezekiel Emanuel, who is a brother of Ari Emanuel, who's a big talent agent here in town, and Rahm Emanuel, who, the Godfather of Chicago, whatever you think of him. He wrote an article, and here's the article. Why I Hope I Die at 75. Yep. That's what he wrote. Why I Hope I Die at 75. 75, that's how long I want to live. 75 years. The preference drives my daughters crazy. It drives my brothers crazy. My loving friends think I'm crazy. They think that I can't mean what I say, that I haven't thought clearly about this, because there's so much in the world to see and do. To convince me of my errors, they enumerate the myriad people I know who are over 75 and doing quite well. They're certain that as I get closer to 75, I will push the desired age back to 80, then 85, and maybe even 90. I am sure of my position. Doubtless death is a loss. It deprives us of experiences and milestones, of time spent with our spouse and children. In short, it deprives us of all the things we value. But here is a simple truth that many of us seem to resist. Living too long is also a loss. It renders many of us, if not disabled, then faltering and declining, a state that may not be worse than death, but is nonetheless deprived. It robs us of our creativity and ability to contribute to work, society, and the world. It transforms how people experience us, relate to us, and most importantly, remember us. We are no longer remembered as vibrant and engaged, but as feeble, ineffectual, even pathetic. By the time I reach 75, I will have lived a complete life. I will have loved and been loved. My children will be grown and in the midst of their own rich lives. I will have seen my grandchildren born and beginning their lives. I will have pursued my life's projects and made whatever contributions, important or not, I am going to make. And hopefully, I will not have too many mental and physical limitations. Dying at 75 will not be a tragedy. Indeed, I plan to have my memorial service before I die. And I don't want any crying or wailing, but a warm gathering filled with fun reminiscences, stories of my awkwardness, and celebrations of a good life. After I die, my survivors can have their own memorial service if they want. That is not my business. Let me be clear about my wish. I am neither asking for more time than is likely nor foreshortening my life. Today I am, as far as my physician and I know, very healthy with no chronic illness. I just climbed Kilimanjaro with my 2 nephews, so I'm not talking about bargaining with God to live to 75 because I have a terminal illness. Nor am I talking about waking up one morning 18 years from now and ending my life through euthanasia or suicide. Since the 1990s, I have actively opposed legalizing euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. People who want to die in one of these ways tend to suffer not from unremitting pain, but from depression, hopelessness, and fear of losing their dignity and control. The people they leave behind inevitably feel they have somehow failed. The answer to these symptoms is not ending a life, but getting help. I have long argued that we should focus on giving all terminally ill people a good, compassionate death, not euthanasia or assisted suicide for a tiny minority. I am talking about how long I want to live and the kind and amount of health care I will consent to after 75. Americans seem to be obsessed with exercising, doing mental puzzles, consuming various juice and protein concoctions, sticking to strict diets, and popping vitamins and supplements, all in a valiant effort to cheat death and prolong life as long as possible. This has become so pervasive that it now defines a cultural type, what I call the American immortal. I reject this aspiration. I think this manic desperation to endlessly extend life is misguided and potentially destructive. For many reasons, 75 is a pretty good age to aim to stop. Americans may live longer than their parents, but they are likely to be more incapacitated. Does that sound very desirable? Not to me. Now, this is a much longer article, but when I read this article, I couldn't help think about Logan's Run. You know, in Logan's Run, you are put to death at 30. You go into the fiery ritual of carousel. Now, I see 2 sides of this. My grandfather lived to have a pretty vibrant life until he was 97. And literally, he had a heart attack, and in 24 hours, 36 hours, I've told the story about what an extraordinary experience that was for me. And then he was gone. My grandmother, step-grandmother actually, his second wife, suffered from chronic pain for 10 years. And she wondered how long would she have to endure another year with this kind of chronic pain. So I can see arguments on both sides. But I found it interesting from a science fiction standpoint. There's been many science fiction stories that deal with life and life extension. Hell, let me tell you this, flat out, I don't want to die. I mean, even if I was incapacitated, maybe if I was in terminal pain or whatever, I was going to die and I was in horrible pain, I wouldn't want that. But like my grandfather, 2 days before he died, he went to Brooks Brothers and bought new underwear, boxer shorts, and T-shirts to wear. I want to be that guy. You know, I want to be watching a movie when it happens. I want to live his life to the fullest, forever. But I think Ezekiel Emanuel has an interesting point. Do I want to exist if I'm in terminal pain or not terminal pain? If I have a terminal illness or chronic pain, that's a good question. I don't think my grandmother wanted to, and we didn't want to let her go, and we did everything we could to extend her life. But I don't know if that was the best thing for her. So it's an interesting ethical question. I mean, obviously, my first response is, hell no. Of course, you have to let people live their lives. But his point is that quality of life does matter. And I found it interesting. So Willow is asking about that. How do I feel about that kind of thing? Well, I think that there's a compelling argument to be made for that. I don't think that our society is yet ready to accept something like that. But there are other societies, I think, that might very well be. But I think definitely if an individual is suffering, if my grandmother had the option to check out with dignity on her own terms, she probably would have. But everyone's trying to fix her, and every day she was getting older and older, and the pain was getting worse and worse, and we didn't want to let her go. So we did everything we could to try and fix her to make her feel better, but I don't know if that was the best thing for her. I don't think the last 10 years of her life were necessarily pleasant. And I'm haunted by that. And when I read this article, I found it interesting. It just made me think. Again, I'm sure if this were a Star Trek episode today, they would tell you how monstrous it is and how the quality of life should be maintained no matter how long it lasts. Whereas, of course, as Willow is mentioning, with Next Generation, they were able to deal with issues like this and not make people angry. That's what great speculative fiction does. It doesn't tell you what you are supposed to think. It tells you, or it offers you something you might want to think about. And that's a very different thing. So I like Half a Life, Willow. I'd be curious what other people think. Willow goes on to say, also, when was the last time you played squash with your good friend Bob Iger? Well, as many people from the John Campea show know, I used to go to Malibu and play squash with Bob Iger and go to Jeffrey's and have lobster every Sunday with Bob, and we used to shoot the shit. Unfortunately, I haven't seen Bob lately. He's been really busy. His life's changed ever since he went on his book tour. You know, we chat. You know, I might do some consulting on the MCU and the Star Wars universe, but Bob and I just really haven't spoken. Not much. We text. Sometimes he sends me inappropriate photos and memes. But other than that, I really don't talk to Bob Iger as much as I used to because he is busy. Mikey Bagista became a member. Well, thanks, Mikey. I appreciate that. Glenn Taylor is here. Hello, Glenn. Rob, Empire is still my favorite Star Wars movie, but Rogue One is a very close second. I think Kathleen Kennedy gets too much hate. Well, Glenn, you know I've been a staunch supporter of Miss Kennedy's on this channel. A lot of people get mad about that, but I mean, she did start her producing career producing E.T., and Steven Spielberg did say that she was one of the best producers that he's ever worked with. And, you know, people, whenever they say, oh, Kathleen Kennedy just goes and gets coffee, I'm like, you have a fundamental lack of understanding about how movies are made. So, look, I think she does get too much hate, but she didn't work on Empire. I just want to point that out. But Rogue One, I think Rogue One, I like Rogue One. The more I watch, the more I like it. So it's definitely something to see. Stubble McShave says, as far as I know, the changes they're doing for Wheel of Time show are combining scenes so they don't have to build 15 separate villages and combine some tertiary characters. I don't think they'll have over 2,000 named characters. Probably not. I can totally understand that. Hey, Roger Haynes sends a thumbs up sticker. Thanks, Roger. I appreciate that, man. Thumbs up to you. Stub McShave also goes on to say, they will also show events that the characters don't see in the books, things like a huge battle with fireballs where someone tries to claim a title. The books are written in a tight third limited, and we only see what POVs see and get their conclusions. Well, I think that's really that again comes with the territory of adaptation. Rob Williams sends in a super chat. Thank you for that, Rob. I appreciate that. And let's see, where are we at in terms of... I got letters. I got stuff to talk about. Stuff to say, ladies and gentlemen. Not me, but you. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, gentle beings, however you identify across these 28 known galaxies. Let's see what you have to say. Who's first? Let's see. Who is first? Who's on first? Yes. Yes is on first. Jason Webster is here. Hi, Robert. I hope you, yourself, and the fabulous and inclusive members of the Postgame Singularity have begun the week with energy and aplomb. I've had people ask me, what are your favorite action films? This posed an interesting question, as I've found that many of my favorites films are either Asian or films I've grown up watching. Very few are contemporary films, those released within the last 10 years. This may be because, like many recent blockbusters released within that period, I have found them to have sacrificed story and characters at the altar of heavy effects-laden or over-the-top stunts and the visual style of filmmaking, style over substance. By the way, that's absolutely true, and the reason for that is action films like that sell more internationally. Characters and nuance rely more on dialogue and things like that, and people want to just get to it. Now, on to the films I consider my favorites within the action genre. Because there's quite a bit I would like to cover concerning my favorite action films, I will cover them over the course of 2 letters. Without further ado, let's get into it, shall we? My favorite action film of all time is the South Korean film The Villainous, which I bought because of you. I have it on Blu-ray. I have yet to watch it. which I consider to be one of the greatest action films of all time. The cinematography, editing, fight, and stunt choreography and performance by lead actress Kim Ok-vin, Thirst from 2009 is the protagonist, and Soo-ki are all sublime. Kim is the third Dan black belt in Hapkido and a second Dan black belt in Taekwondo, so she was perfect for the fight sequences within the film. From the stunning POV action sequence where Soo-ki lays waste to a gangster's hideout full of people with her gun, knives, and axes, to the climactic show-stopping confrontation between our hero and the film's major antagonist, Lee Jung-song, the film is a gripping ride that never loses your attention from beginning to end. The villainess is kinetic, bloody, and entertaining. The film centers around how Soo-ki, Kim Ok-vin, comes into service of the clandestine government organization and becomes an assassin. Though ruthlessly efficient at her job, she yearns for a normal life. However, her past returns to give her an abject lesson in how a violent past can make any yearnings for a normal life impossible. The film features a motorcycle chase scene that inspired a similar, though inferior, sequence in John Wick 3: Parabellum. The film received a long and resounding standing ovation at the 70th Cannes Film Festival, and the film was a critical success and received numerous awards, including Best Cinematography and a Technical Award at the 54th Grand Bell Awards. The Grand Bell Awards are a prestigious awards ceremony and is considered the South Korean equivalent of the Academy Awards. Raiders of the Lost Ark became one of my favorite films from the moment I caught a Saturday session of the film with my father at the Forum Cinema at the heart of the Brisbane CBD. That would be Central Business District. It is a perfect homage of the Saturday matinee serials George Lucas grew up with watching at his local cinema. The stories, characters, and action allow the film to leave an indelible mark on me, as Star Wars had achieved some years earlier. I had a brown leather jacket and khaki trousers and persuaded my parents to buy me a brown fedora hat, and my father made me a whip. Where we lived in the Brisbane suburb, it's Brisbane, right? It's Brisbane, not Brisbane. In the Brisbane suburb of Ashgrove, our backyard garden looked like the Amazon jungle with numerous large trees, shrubs, and plants. So I would dress up and grab one of my mother's idol statues and go down and recreate the opening sequence. First of all, stop right there. Your mother's idol statues? Did she collect idol statues? I love that. After all, I was only 10 when the film began its theatrical run. The costume by Deborah Noodleman Landis, and that's John Landis' wife, by the way, and the performance of Harrison Ford created one of the most iconic hero characters in film history. The screenplay and performance by Karen Allen made Marion Ravenwood a strong woman who wasn't there for Indy to save. She gives as good as she gets in the film, and she is not just there to bat her eyelids and say, "Save me, Indy." John Rhys-Davies was great as Sala and imbues the character with a presence and a personality greater than a normal sidekick or foil for the hero. With a physical presence and a commanding voice, John Rhys-Davies, Ingles, is very much in the same vein of fellow British acting luminary Brian Blessed. Dive! The film deservedly won 5 Academy Awards for editing, visual effects, production design, sound and sound design. Distributed by Paramount Pictures, Raiders of the Lost Ark earned US $389 million worldwide against a budget of $20 million. The film has spawned 3 successful sequels in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But was that successful? Was it? How can anyone have a list of action films and not have one featuring the one and only Jackie Chan? The man is to martial arts films what Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire is to Golden Age Hollywood musicals. His films with kinetic fight sequences, hair-raising stunt sequences, and physical comedy make them a pleasure to watch. My favorite of the films starring Chan is Police Story from 1985. It is a very entertaining film which anyone who considers themselves a fan of action genre can enjoy. In the acting stakes, Chan is well supported by Bridget Lin, and Maggie Cheung, who had become legend in Asian cinema themselves. The stunt and fight choreography are amazing and would inspire homages to the film and the shantytown stunts in Michael Bay's Bad Boys 11, or Bad Boys 2. You said you have 2 ones here, but I know what you mean. The mall fight scene in Dwight H. Little's Rapid Fire and the bus stopping scene in Andrei Konchalovsky's Tango and Cash. The film centers around Royal Hong Kong Police Force Sergeant Kevin Chan Ka-kui, who is a part of the department's attempt to bring down the crime lord Chu Tao. When Chan is framed for murder, he must clear his name with the assistance of Tao's secretary, played by Bridget Lin, and his girlfriend Maggie Cheung, to bring down Tao's operation. The film was a commercial and critical success, winning 2 awards at the 5th Hong Kong Film Awards, including Best Picture. The film spawned 4 direct sequels in Police Story 2, Police Story 3, Police Story 4, First Strike, and 2 reboots in New Police Story and Police Story 2013. Another favorite of mine within the action genre is the South Korean detective thriller Cold Eyes. Directed by Cho Wee-suk, The film featured great acting from the ensemble cast who complemented each other well, with lead actress Han Hoi-ju the standout. The action sequences are expertly choreographed and the film moves along at a pace. The film received numerous awards, with Han Ho-ju winning Best Actress at the prestigious Blue Dragon Film Awards. Han Ho-ju had come to prominence early in the decade due to her multi-award winning performance as the lead in the popular historical K-drama Dong Yi. Distributed by Next Entertainment World, the film was a commercial success, earning $34.8 million against a budget of $4.5 million during its theatrical run. I love Luc Besson's 1990 thriller La Femme Nikita. The film centers around a drug-addicted delinquent named Nikita, who is forced to become an assassin of a clandestine French government organization known as the Center after attempted robbery of a pharmacy leaves a policeman dead. Anne Perrault gives a terrific performance as Nikita, and she receives solid support from Jean-Hugues Anglade, Chechi Cario, who can do no wrong, and Jean Moreau. The film also features a cameo from Jean Reno. So Jean Moreau is different than Jean Reno. So what's not to love about La Femme Nikita? Distributed by Gaumont Film Company, the film achieved popularity during its theatrical run in Britain, Canada, Italy, and Japan. The film became the third highest grossing French film of all time upon its release in the U.S. This was despite mediocre reviews, though the film received positive reviews from Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert. And Perrault received the César Award for Best Actress and the David D. Donatello Award. That would be the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Award. No, I'm just kidding. For Best Foreign Actress in 1991. The film also received a Golden Globe nomination for Best Foreign Language Film. Lethal Weapon is a favorite of mine within the action genre. Mel Gibson and Danny Glover as Detective Martin Riggs and Roger Murtaugh perfectly complemented one another. Gibson is an amazing actor, and he nailed not only Riggs' edgy lone wolf intensity, but also displayed a gift for comedic timing. Glover was great at playing an experienced and jaded homicide detective who goes from contemplating the possibility of retirement to becoming rejuvenated for a job because of Riggs. Both Tom Atkins as heroin smuggler Peter McAllister and Gary Busey as McAllister's chief enforcer, Mr. Joshua, were good in making the film's wait a minute. Tom Atkins doesn't play Peter McAllister, does he? Gary Busey is not McAllister. Let me check on that. Hang on. Tom Atkins was like the good guy, right? Hang on. I think. Let me see. I got to get this right. And make sure. Jingle bell, jingle bell, jingle bell rock. Let's see. Yeah, see, it's Tom Atkins plays Michael Hunsaker, and it's Mitchell Ryan. Mitchell Ryan plays the general. So Michael Hunsaker is the guy that Murtaugh knows, and they're helping him. I just want to correct that. So he's the general. McAllister's chief enforcer, Mr. Joshua, were good in making the film's antagonists the epitome of slimy, evil bastardry. The film was neatly and tightly directed by Richard Donner and moves at a smooth pace. The action sequences are great, and the fight choreography was perfect for the characters of Riggs and Mr. Joshua due to their military backgrounds. This was because the coordinator was former U.S. Army Special Forces instructor Bobby Bass. Prior to the film's theatrical release, it received positive reviews from Variety, The Washington Post's Richard Harrington, The New York Times' Janet Maslin, and Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times. So there's the first letter looking at a few of the films that comprise the list of my favorite action films of all time. Could you please disclose what you consider your favorite action films, Robert? This is a terrific question for the members of the Post Geek Singularity to answer in the chat. To yourself and the sensational members of the Post Geek Singularity, enjoy the remainder of the week and have a Merry Christmas. Sincerely, Jason Webster. Well, some of my favorite action films are, John Woo's The Killer and Hard Boiled and Bullet in the Head. But mostly The Killer and Hard Boiled. Love those films. I also love The Rad, or as I like to say, it is The Rad. The Raid and The Raid 2 Barandal. I love The Rad and The Rad 2 even radder. I love Die Hard is one of my favorite action films. The Road Warrior is one of my favorite action films. Let's see. Of course, I like things like Lethal Weapon. I like Commando. Yeah, I mean these are all the standard. Look, I like all the Mad Max movies, to be honest. I think Fury Road is an action masterpiece. I like The Professional more than I like La Femme Nikita, but it's it's pretty. I mean, they're both good. I like them both. Raiders of the Lost Ark, of course. What's not to love about Raiders in terms of the action? But yeah, that's Heat, the gun battle in the streets of L.A. One of my favorite action set pieces. I mean, it's definitely incredible. I don't know if you'd call RoboCop an action movie, but there are things in it, like when RoboCop attacks the cocaine factory, I think is a really well done sequence. But yeah, and I've got to watch The Villainous. I bought it because you told me to buy it, and I haven't watched it yet. But I need to. That's what I'm going to catch up on. So yes, indeed. Matt Mason writes in and says, Dear Rob, the charity I work for was founded because of the inspiration of 90s Star Trek, the belief that we can better ourselves and the rest of humanity. Yet the modern iteration of Star Trek is a depressing, dystopian nightmare. Do you think that modern Star Trek will ever inspire people to better themselves by becoming doctors, engineers, or scientists? It disheartens me to think that new people may come upon modern Star Trek and think the future is hopeless. Regards, Matt Mason, spaceshipearth.org.uk. I'm going to put that in here. Yeah, well, let me tell you something about modern Star Trek. I agree with you. I think it's a dystopian nightmare. You know what modern Star Trek is all about? It's all about me, 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 me. Look how great I am. How great my feelings are. How I'm... No. No. Your feelings mean nothing. The universe is indifferent to your suffering. The only way we can survive is together. You have to look beyond yourself. Fuck your feelings. You know what? Fuck your feelings. What's important is that we all go out together, that we take humanity out together, that we work together. You know, hopefully your feelings, when I say that, your feelings are important, but they're not the only thing. You are not the center of the universe. We don't know what the center of the universe is, to be honest. My problem with modern Star Trek is, and I think why so many people today like it, is because it reiterates that message that you're special. No matter who you are, no matter what you do, you know, you might not be the best at something, but you're special anyway. Yes, you are. You're that special person. Fuck that. No, you're not. You're nothing without the help of other people. You're nothing without the work you need to do to get on board a Federation starship. That's the problem. Work harder. Be better. And that's what Star Trek tells us. Star Trek was about excellent human beings doing excellent things because they worked really, 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 really hard. And if they didn't work hard, they would die because the universe is indifferent to your suffering. And Star Trek, to me, as I was growing up, inspired in me, what could we all be if we worked really hard? What would the very best of us be like if we could get over all of our problems? They'd be the crew of the Starship Enterprise because they were that good. And I wanted to be a part of that group. Modern Star Trek says that, hey, anybody can be a part of the group. You know, despite your problems. I know it's how you feel. I know. Let's talk about that. Let's change our behavior and make everybody's feelings important. No, the universe will kill you. The universe will destroy you if you think that your feelings are more important than what we're doing here on this starship. You know, if you can't do your job, if you're sitting at the nav console, it can't just be like, I'm suffering from PTSD. Get the fuck out or we're all going to die. That's simple. That's what I don't, maybe I object to the most about modern Star Trek is when I grew up, I'm like, I'm never going to be as good as these people, but I can aspire to be that way. I can work hard. And maybe one day I might be worthy of being on the crew of the Starship Enterprise. But now it's like, nah, anybody can. I understand, your feelings and all that. Ain't going to survive. The universe is indifferent, like I said. And I think you're right. The inspiration of 90s Star Trek was aspirational. If we could one day be like this. Modern Star Trek is, I want to be successful now. I feel this way. I'm an individual. It's like everybody today. Everybody's thinking in the wrong. They're all thinking about themselves. Everything is me, 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 me. Star Trek is about you. What can I do to help? The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. And yeah, you'll say to me, Rob, what about at the end of the day when Kirk and Spock and McCoy go and help, well, Spock or Kirk or McCoy? And that's because, you know what? When you're friends like that, then you can go help the one. But for the most part, Star Trek was all about how do we help? How can we how can we do the greater good? And sometimes your feelings just didn't matter. And in the grand scheme of things, I think that's a really interesting. The charity work I founded was because of the inspiration of 90s Star Trek. You looked outside yourself, the charity you work for. Your charity was founded because people were looking outside themselves. And I find nowadays that's not the message of Star Trek. But I could be wrong. What do you guys think? Omar94 says, hi, Rob, moderators and Post-Geek Singularity. Something I always found interesting with making movies is studio suggestions and notes. Sometimes they can be helpful, but other times they can be questionable. For example, I was reading behind-the-scenes info on David Fincher movie Seven. The movie's ending has a head in a box, as was written by Andrew Kevin Walker's original script. However, New Line was apprehensive about that and made suggestions to change the ending to a more... In the end, Fincher and Pitt won, so the original script's ending was used, and the rest is history. I don't work in the industry, but I always find studio notes and suggestions to be an interesting part of the filmmaking process, or the most maddening part of the filmmaking process. Thanks, and live long and prosper. Well, many people have heard me tell the story that I was actually one of the very first people to read that script, to read Seven, and to this day, it was the only screenplay that I ever said yes to. Not maybe, not recommend, yes, the best script that I ever read. It took 5 years from the time I read it to the time that film got made, because everyone said, you can't end a movie with Gwyneth Paltrow. They didn't know it was Gwyneth Paltrow, but with Gwyneth Paltrow's head in a box? Our protagonists can't lose. Well, that's conventional wisdom. And David Fincher wanted to make the movie. I mean, remember, he was in director jail, or he left directing movies because of the experience he had on Alien 3. 5 years he wanted to make. But that's that movie. Andy Kevin Walker's script, when I read that script for the very first time, and I'll tell you, I've said it before, I'll say it again. There was an agent named Gavin Polone, who he is a producer now. He worked at the time, if memory serves, for Bauer Benedict, which doesn't exist. It merged with another agency and became UTA. Every single thing that Gavin Polone sent in was worth. I thought that was an odd excuse or an odd request. Well, they're like, okay. Nobody cared. It's like, okay, well, and I would ask every day, hey, did something come in from Gavin Polone? And Seven did. And Andy Kevin Walker at the time was a clerk at Tower Records in New York City. And he wrote that. That was a spec script, yo. And when I read that script, I read it twice in a row and then wrote coverage on it. I freaked out. I mean, because I love serial killer stories. I read the script. I couldn't believe it. I even think the script, I love a pulp aspect to it when I was reading it in my mind. I mean, it still is what it is. But boy, did he class up the joint. And not that it wasn't already there in the script, because it was. But by God, did I love that movie. And I love reading that script. And man, I really, really loved it. I'm going to read another Omar94 letter because it is the 21st of December, and Omar likes to 21st 2020 marks the 30th anniversary of the Ivan Reitman movie starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Kindergarten Cop, which released on December 21st, 1990. Oh my God. I loved Kindergarten Cop because it had Richard Tyson from Two Moon Junction and 3 O'Clock High in it. Realizing he did not want to be typecast as just an action star, Schwarzenegger decides to do comedy, teaming with Reitman and Danny DeVito in 1988's Twins. Following that film's success, Schwarzenegger reunited with Reitman and did Kindergarten Cop. The film was a success, making the list of top 10 highest-grossing films of 1990, along with another Schwarzenegger-starring film, Total Recall. Schwarzenegger himself called Kindergarten Cop his favorite movie he's ever done in his career. I personally found the film to be just okay. To me, it felt like two movies combined. On one side, you have a hard-boiled detective story about tracking down a drug dealer. On the other, there's a lighthearted fish-out-of-water story about a new teacher in a new school. Another problem I had was it had a very inconsistent tone, as the film regularly switches from serious and lighthearted and vice versa. The film might have worked better for me if it maintained the same tone throughout. Like if the detective story was more comedic instead of dead serious, or if the stuff which happens at the school was all serious instead of lighthearted. For me, all the best parts were the serious, hard-boiled detective story, like the opening 20 to 25 minutes. Anyways, that's just how I feel about it. I'm sure others will feel differently, as many people out there really like Kindergarten Cop. I'm one of them. Thanks, and live long and prosper. Well, Omar, I haven't seen that movie in ages. I really need to see it again. I think that would be great. Mark Largent, who I started to read but as someone who grew up loving Star Trek and Mad and Cracked magazines, I've never been able to resist them. There are many that miss the mark, but when you do stumble across one of the great ones, there's a special reward for a Trek fan in being in on the joke. Saturday Night Live's original parody with the not ready for primetime players is certainly one of the best. I agree. My personal favorite is Star Trip by the Congress of Wonders. It doesn't really know it's Star Trek very well, but it's very funny. Captain Quirk's slow burn, vocalized more with sounds and sighs than with dialogue, cracked me up. It has the funniest beep noise of any Trek parody. I gotta hear that now. I first came across it on an album of Star Trek novelty songs at my college radio station. Star Trekkin', I know the songs. I remember laughing so hard I almost passed out. This led me to want to create my own Star Trek parodies over the years, and I eventually started making animated puppet parodies of Star Trek called Stalled Trek. Oh, I know. I'm very aware of your puppet parodies. I've parodied the classic Star Trek episode Amok Time with Stalled Trek Amok Time, Amut Time, where the volcanine Mr. Spot finds himself in heat. And a certain little fan film I think you have some knowledge of, Stalled Trek Prelude to Axed We Are, which finally leads me to my question. What are some of your favorite Star Trek parodies? I suspect you are aware of some that the general public has never seen. And if I may be allowed a blatant plug, currently I have an Indiegogo for my latest Stalled Trek parody, The City on the Edge of Foreclosure. Rest assured, the Guardian is only a stone donut in this parody. I will definitely post. Normally I wouldn't post this, but I'll post this because I like your work. It's good. It's worth being supported. So let me put it in here as I do. There you go. In addition to the film, I'm making parodies of the old Star Trek photo novels. Just by pure chance, The City on the Edge of Forever and Amok Time were the first and last episodes that made it into photo novels, and I've got a variant cover done in the style of those old paperbacks that we Trek fans of a certain age love so much. Oh, I'd love to see it. Darren Doctorman's done a couple of photo novel parodies that I really love. Live long and prosper, Rob. A fan. Mark R. Largent. Well, you know, I do like some of the Star Trek XXX parodies. No, what are my favorite? You know, I got to tell you, I take Star Trek too seriously. I don't necessarily love Star Trek parodies, but I do think the Saturday Night Live one, and look, Saturday Night Live did the Get a Life speech with Shatner. You know, I think that's one of the best. Turkish Star Trek, I don't know if you'd call that a parody, but I would. But yeah, I do like that. So, yeah, again, Star Trek parodies, who did the Star Trekkin' song? I forget, but I did like that song. It's Intelligent Life, but not as we know it. But I do love your puppet. I do love your puppet work. I think it's really, really good. Check it out, everybody. Look up Stalled Trek. Pedro Ferreira. Pedro, how are you? Hi, Rob. I don't want this letter to be too long, so I'll get straight to the point of saying since I got a 4K Blu-ray player, I've been having issues with the aspect ratio settings. I wonder if you could offer me your take on this. Please pay attention here. Explaining this to other people always causes confusion, so I've had a lot of strange conflicting info. For years, I've used a Samsung Smart TV and a Panasonic non-4K player. Apart from some noise issues, everything's been great. Like my parents, I had the TV set to 16:9 and the player set to 4:3. Star Trek TOS and TNG on Blu-ray would appear windowed. This also means 185 movies like Back to the Future would have bars on the top and bottom, while 235:1 or around that would be letterboxed. The first Bill and Ted movie looks great this way. I like watching things this way because it looks cinematic, but I've been told this is not the correct way I should be watching stuff. Yes, it is. Q a couple of months ago, and I upgraded both the TV and the player to 4K, keeping the same manufacturer for both. So my player is a UB820. To my horror, it seems Panasonic 4K players do not have the option of a 4:3 setting. The only setting it's automatically set to is 16 by 9, which stretches every widescreen disc you put in. Remember, before my TV was set to 16 by 9 and my player set to 4 by 3. Now my TV set is set to 16 by 9, but my player is set to 16 by 9 without any option to change. As far as I'm aware, I don't lose any picture, but it all looks artificially stretched. Films like Back to the Future or E.T. almost completely fill the screen. That's because they're 185, while Back to the Future or Ted and Ghostbusters stretches beyond letterbox to look like fake 185. Worse are 4x3 shows. Star Trek on Blu-ray now has bars on the side, as it should. My Doctor Who DVDs are unchanged in this regard, but bizarrely my Street Hawk DVD has been artificially cramped with black bars of the player on the top and bottom of the screen of the source material. On my old DVD player, this show filled up the entire screen. On a side note, I do wonder why, in comparison, other 4x3 shows on DVD just had black bars on the side like Doctor Who, but needless to say, Street Hawk just looks wrong. I'm told over at Blu-ray.com this is the way I should have watched stuff on a widescreen HD TV. Panasonic tech support haven't gotten a clue what I mean by all this. Perhaps Panasonic could release a firmware update that adds the option to switch ratios. I wondered, Rob, how I should be watching my discs. Are having black bars a bad thing when they make a movie look more cinematic? Is artificially stretching the picture to 16 by 9 a good thing and I just need to get used to it? Anyway, I would also like to congratulate you on your 2-year anniversary. It's been great being allowed to write in. I always hope my letters are contributing something useful to discussion. I wonder, have you ever considered interviewing for your channel some of your regular writers like Willow, Omar94, me, etc.? Kind regards, Pedro. Yes, I actually have. First of all, let me address your question. The aspect ratio question is a very interesting one, because when it comes to things like, first of all, most television programs before the year 2000 made in the United States are 4x3. So that is their aspect ratio. Star Trek The Next Generation is 4x3. When you watch it on a Blu-ray, when you watch it in high definition, the actual picture that you get is a 16 by 9 image with a square with black bands on the side, because Star Trek be the full setting, which means you're getting your full 16 by 9 image. And a letterbox movie, a movie that's 235, is still inset inside. Think of the 16 by 9 image of your TV as a bottle. All right? A 185 image, sometimes depending on how it's mastered, will probably be done as 177 to 1 and fill up your 16 by 9 frame. It should be filled. A 235 or 239 to 1 image, like a letterbox image, will still have black bands on the top and bottom of the screen, but will be 235. When you are dealing with DVDs or older material, it really depends on how your TVs work. That can be problematic. Your TV should be able to shift between aspect ratios. But some don't, because older DVD material doesn't work that way. So I would have to, normally the setting would be full. You should never change your setting. If you're going to go back and watch your old 4x3 images or DVDs or something, they're probably going to look stretched. But the setting should be on your TV, not your player. Your player will just play what it's given. It's the TV that makes the adjustments. So your player should be full 16 by 9, whatever. It's the TV that you should be able to change things at. But you either leave it at full or 16 by 9, that's it. And maybe it'll have a 4x3 setting. But that's what you should do. I mean, I'd have to see, if you could send me a picture of your screen, it would be easier to know the difference. I'm just going to zip through. I actually have to go work on my Netflix show. So let me just rip through all. Wow, you guys have let's see. So Chris Stefanagel sent in a super chat and said, "Hi Rob, looking forward to your next appearance on the Inglorious Treksperts this weekend and hearing your choices for the best sci-fi episodes." Well, Chris, thanks for supporting the channel. Don't throw things at us. Boy, was it contentious, and remember, we're old. I can't wait to hear what you guys think, but thanks for that. The Inglorious Treksperts begin our countdown of the 101 Greatest television episodes of all time. Rob Williams says, hey, Rob, The Stand is my favorite King book. The original miniseries didn't impress as much me, but I ate up every second. Earlier said in your headcanon that Larry Underwood sounded like Springsteen, but in my head, he's as smooth as Michael McDonald. There you go. I like that. Sifo Claudius is here. Bonjour, mon ami. I'm watching a show from the African-American seats in the Caribbean-American subsection. I got in with the military discount. My wife is sitting in the Iberian subsection, seats over in the white female stands. Iberian girl. Due to our income, we're just in the lower mezzanine, but our son Spencer is near the upper deck. He's part of a growing group of extremely diverse audience members, but he's not even listening to your show. He's reading manga and chatting with a girl. The new Star Trek Discovery take on diversity seems very late 80s, maybe even early 90s. Why is that? Are STD's creators out of touch with reality? You know what I knew things were getting better? I knew things were getting better because I saw the movie Step Up to the Streets. And it was the good guy gang that was very diverse. And there was all people represented in the good guy dance group. And I'm like, you know what? And like the bad guys were all one people. And I'm like, this is diversity done right. Hiborik says, hey, Rob and the PGS, always a pleasure kicking back with y'all. Do you think adaptations will always suffer from the desire to appeal to fresh eyes? Yes, and I think that's a mistake. I think classical storytelling works for a reason. And I think here's the thing, when you're appealing to fashion, you're never going to win. Because fashion immediately dates whatever it is that you're doing, which is a bummer. Rick G says, regarding The Stand and adaptations in general, why do people seem to cling to the idea that the adaptation fails unless it mirrors the story they already know? You've already read that story. You know that story. Is experiencing the same thing what you truly want? Why? I admit there are many red flags in CBS's The Stand, but there is promise too. Should we not reserve judgment until the story has played itself out? No, we should. Should we not be open to experiencing this beloved tale through new eyes? Perhaps it shall fail miserably, collapsing under the showrunner's pretentiousness, or perhaps there is something to see, some measure of import, even if it comes to pass that the show in its entirety does not live up to the text upon which it's based. Well, gee, I think that's an interesting take, but sure, new eyes, but then why adapt the story? I think there's a trade-off there, and look, I agree, I'm tuning in and I'm watching it, but I haven't been impressed with what I've seen so far because, again, I think it's problematic. I don't think it's working. But because part of the story that I loved was the propulsive nature of the first third and fall of civilization. And I don't think it'll be interesting to see how they deal with the second part of that story. But then we'll know. I don't disagree with you. But then again, why adapt something if you just want to change it? I mean, the whole point is, don't you have some fealty to the author's original intent? It's a good question, though. Devin Hilton says, been meaning to ask, does your jacket have a story? I'm willing to listen. It has characters. It's become a trademark like Willie Nelson's guitar. It's funny? I didn't even think about this being a Snake Plissken jacket. It's a jacket I bought like 20 years ago and it's Guess. And I just didn't wear it. And like last year, I hadn't worn it in a long time. I don't think I'd worn it since I was in Sydney in 2005. And I just put it on. People liked it. So I kept wearing it. That's the only story. That's the story that's there. Oh, Rick G goes on to say, all of this is to say there are certainly red flags in this version of The Stand, but I see promise too. But then again, my favorite King novel is Duma Key. I liked Duma Key. I liked it. So what do I know? Well, I like Duma Key. Thank you for all you do, and thank you for indulging my rant. Cheers, post-geek singularity. Well, cheers to you. And look, we're going to cover The Stand every week. We're going to see what happens. Johnny Boy says, hi, Rob. The Star Trek song was The Firm. I thought it was The Firm. Released in 1987. I still have the original 12-inch single. How sad is that? No, brah. 12-inch singles are dope. I have lots of 12-inch singles. All my Frankie Goes to Hollywood 12-inch singles. Come on. And Xanadu did Kubla Khan, A Pleasure Dome Erect. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I have to go. I am late. I'm late for work. I need to go. I got to go work on the Netflix series. So I want to bid you all a farewell. I want to thank you to all of my, I want to thank Justin Toner's here. My moderators, is anyone else here? Bunyan Snipe is here. Thank you, Bunyan. Robert Pariso is here. I I don't know who else is here, but thank you all for being great moderators. I want to thank everybody for supporting the channel. I want to thank you all for writing in letters. I'm going to be here throughout the Christmas holiday season. I can't wait to share more with all of you. Thank you for everybody who's become members, and there's going to be lots of cool stuff happening. So thank you for that. I don't know if we're doing a whining about movies tonight because I didn't know I was going to be working on this, but now I am doing the show, so I mean actual work. So we'll see. Just keep your eyes peeled. We'll find out. Are we doing a Christmas story tonight? Who knows? Anyway, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I would say to everyone, have a better day. And wait, can I turn this off? I have to end the stream. Have a good day, everyone. Mm-mm-mm-mm-mm-mm.